My best friend destroyed my life. Then I became his nightmare. Nobody knew exactly when Ronan Drake returned to town. Some people swore they saw his black pickup rolling down Main Street just after sunrise. Others claimed he stopped at Miller's gas station around noon. A few insisted they saw him sitting outside the old diner, drinking coffee and staring across the street like he had never left. Nobody knew for sure. But by sunset, everyone knew one thing. Ronan Drake was back. And the moment people started whispering his name, the entire town became uncomfortable. Because everyone remembered what happened 5 years earlier. Back then, Ronan wasn't the man people saw now. He was the kind of guy everybody liked. Friendly, hardworking, the first guy to help when someone needed it. The guy who remembered birthdays. The guy who always had your back. Then everything changed. His fiancée cheated on him. Not with a stranger, not with a coworker, with his childhood best friend, a man named Jake Morrison. The betrayal became the biggest scandal the town had seen in years. Everyone talked about it. Everyone picked sides. Everyone had an opinion. Then one morning, Ronan disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation, no social media, no phone calls, nothing. His house sat empty, his number stopped working. His friends never heard from him again. For 5 years, nobody knew where he went. And somehow, that mystery became bigger than the betrayal itself. People created stories. Some said he moved overseas. Some claimed he joined private security. Others swore he had spent years working dangerous jobs in remote places. Nobody knew the truth. The only thing everyone knew was this. The smiling young man who left was gone. The man who returned was someone else entirely. Witnesses described the same thing. Black leather jacket, dark jeans, heavy boots, a short beard, broader shoulders, harder face, and eyes. Cold eyes, patient eyes, the eyes of a man who looked like he had spent years carrying something heavy, something dark. And the strangest part? Ronan never explained anything. When people greeted him, he nodded. When they asked questions, he smiled politely. When they asked where he had been, he simply changed the subject. No stories, no excuses, no answers. That silence terrified people more than any explanation ever could. Especially one man, Jake Morrison. The moment Jake heard Ronan was back, people said he nearly dropped the beer in his hand. His wife Sarah asked what was wrong. Jake told her nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Because unlike everyone else in town, Jake knew exactly why Ronan had left. And now, the ghost had returned. The problem wasn't that Ronan threatened him. He didn't. The problem wasn't that Ronan called him. He didn't. The problem wasn't that Ronan confronted him. He never did. The problem was that Jake had absolutely no idea why Ronan came back. And guilty people have very powerful imaginations. For weeks, Ronan simply existed. He bought an old house, renovated it, kept to himself. Yet somehow Jake started seeing him everywhere. At the diner, at the hardware store, walking through town, talking to people. Every sighting felt like a reminder of what he had done, a reminder that the man he betrayed wasn't gone anymore. And slowly, very slowly, Jake Morrison began to unravel. But the real nightmare hadn't even started yet. Because Ronan Drake wasn't interested in getting his old life back. He wasn't interested in forgiveness. He wasn't interested in closure. No. Ronan Drake had come home for something else. Something much darker. Part 2. The First Cracks. For almost a month, nothing happened. At least that's what people thought. Ronan Drake kept renovating his house, kept drinking coffee at the same diner, kept walking through town like he had lived there his entire life. No confrontations, no threats, no revenge. Just silence. But silence can be a weapon. Jake Morrison was learning that the hard way. Every morning he woke up wondering if today would be the day Ronan finally made his move. Every evening he went to bed disappointed, and somehow, that was even worse. Because fear grows in empty spaces. The longer Ronan waited, the larger he became inside Jake's head. One rainy Thursday evening, everything began to change. Sarah Morrison was leaving a grocery store when her car refused to start. The rain was pouring, the parking lot was almost empty, and after 20 minutes of trying, she was soaked, frustrated, and angry. She called Jake. No answer. She called again, straight to voicemail. Jake was at Murphy's bar, 3 beers deep, complaining about work, completely unaware that his wife was stranded. Then headlights appeared through the rain, a black pickup. Sarah recognized it immediately, everyone in town did. The truck stopped beside her, the driver's door opened, and Ronan Drake stepped out. For a moment, Sarah felt nervous. Not because she knew him personally, because she knew the stories. Everybody knew the stories. Ronan looked at the smoking engine, then looked at Sarah, then back at the engine. Battery terminal. That was all he said. No dramatic introduction, no charm, no flirting. Just business. 10 minutes later the car was running. Sarah stood there holding her umbrella, watching him wipe his hands on a rag. "Thank you." Ronan nodded. "No problem." Then he got back into his truck and drove away. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Not because Ronan was attractive, not because he was mysterious, because he had shown up. Jake didn't. The comparison wasn't fair, but comparisons rarely are. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths again. At the diner, at the hardware store, at the gas station. Small town, small world. Each conversation lasted a little longer. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Nothing inappropriate, nothing anyone could point to. But something was changing. Sarah found herself laughing more. Jake found himself drinking more. Neither seemed connected, at least not yet. Then one afternoon, Olivia Hart saw them together. She was leaving work when she noticed Ronan and Sarah sitting outside a coffee shop, talking, laughing, just talking. Yet something about it bothered her immediately, a strange feeling in her stomach. Because Sarah was looking at Ronan the same way Olivia used to. Years ago, before everything fell apart, before the betrayal, before the disappearance. Olivia sat inside her car and watched. Ronan never looked in her direction. Or maybe he did. With Ronan, nobody could ever tell anymore. That evening, Olivia made a phone call. Jake answered on the 3rd ring. "Have you seen him with Sarah?" Silence. "What?" "I saw them today." More silence. Then Jake laughed, a nervous laugh, the kind people make when they're trying to convince themselves everything is fine. "They were probably just talking." Olivia wasn't convinced, and deep down, neither was Jake. That night Jake barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ronan, standing in the rain, fixing Sarah's car, listening to her laugh, looking calm, patient, controlled. Everything Jake wasn't anymore. For the first time, a terrifying thought entered his mind. What if Olivia was wrong? What if Ronan didn't come back for her? What if she was never the target? What if he came back for me? Jake sat upright in bed, his heart pounding. Beside him, Sarah was asleep. Outside, the rain tapped against the window. And somewhere across town, Ronan Drake was probably sleeping peacefully. Which somehow made everything worse. Because Jake was finally beginning to understand something. Ronan wasn't acting like a man seeking revenge. He wasn't acting angry. He wasn't acting hurt. He wasn't acting emotional at all. And that frightened Jake more than any threat ever could. Because the most dangerous people aren't the ones who lose control. They're the ones who already have it. And Jake Morrison was slowly realizing he was no longer in control of anything. Part 3. The Man Who Never Left Their Heads. After that night, Jake Morrison started noticing something disturbing. Ronan Drake wasn't appearing more often. It only felt that way. The truth was, Ronan had somehow taken up permanent residence inside Jake's head. Jake saw him everywhere. A black pickup parked outside a diner, a tall figure crossing Main Street, a leather jacket disappearing around a corner. Every glimpse felt personal. Every sighting felt deliberate. Every encounter felt like a message, even when there wasn't one. The drinking got worse. The arguments got worse. The silence between him and Sarah got worse. Everything got worse. Everything except Ronan. Ronan never seemed to change, never seemed angry, never seemed rushed, never seemed emotional, as though he had already accepted the outcome years ago. One evening, Jake finally snapped. Sarah had just come home from work. She placed her keys on the kitchen counter. Jake was sitting at the table, a half-empty bottle beside him, waiting. "Where were you?" Sarah sighed immediately. She already knew where this was going. "Work. You were late. There was traffic." Jake laughed, a bitter laugh. "Traffic." Sarah crossed her arms. "What is your problem?" Jake stood. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "My problem?" His voice was rising. "My problem is that every time I turn around, he's there." The room became silent. Sarah knew immediately who he meant. Neither of them needed to say the name anymore. Ronan had become a shadow hanging over the entire house. "You need help." Jake stared at her. "What?" "You need help." Her voice remained calm. "He's not doing anything." That sentence hit harder than she intended, because deep down, Jake knew it was true. That was the problem. Ronan wasn't threatening him, wasn't stalking him, wasn't harassing him. The fear was coming from somewhere else, somewhere much harder to fight. His own guilt. A week later, the town hosted its annual summer barbecue. The entire community showed up. Families, friends, neighbors. The kind of event Jake usually enjoyed. Not this year. This year he spent the entire drive wondering whether Ronan would be there. And the moment he arrived, he saw him. Standing near the grill, laughing with a group of neighbors. Comfortable, relaxed, confident. People genuinely liked him. That bothered Jake more than anything else. Convinced himself Ronan would never recover. Nobody survives something like that. Nobody comes back stronger. Nobody comes back better. Yet there he was, looking like the strongest man in the entire town. Looking like the betrayal had somehow sharpened him instead of breaking him. As the evening continued, Jake drank, then drank more, and then more. Eventually he found himself standing across from Ronan, face to face, for the first time in 5 years. The noise around them faded. Conversations became distant. Laughter disappeared. People noticed. People watched. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Everyone remembered. Jake stared at him. Ronan stared back. Calm, unmoving. The same expression he always wore. The expression Jake hated most. Because it revealed absolutely nothing. Finally, Jake spoke. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air. 5 years of guilt hidden inside 4 words. "What do you want?" Revenge? Justice? An apology? What? For several seconds, Ronan said nothing. Then, for the first time since returning to town, he smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just slightly. The smile somehow made him more frightening. Then he answered, "Nothing," and walked away. Jake stood frozen. People slowly returned to their conversations. The barbecue continued. The music continued. Life continued. But Jake couldn't move. Because Ronan's answer had terrified him. Nothing. A man seeking revenge wants something. A man seeking justice wants something. A man seeking forgiveness wants something. But a man who wants nothing, a man who has already decided the outcome, that man is dangerous. Later that evening, Sarah found Jake sitting alone, drunk, silent, broken. What happened? Jake stared into the darkness, then whispered something he never thought he would say. "I think I'm losing." Sarah frowned. Losing what? Jake looked across the field, toward the distant figure of Ronan Drake, and for the first time, he answered honestly. Everything. Part 4. The beginning of the end. After the barbecue, something changed. Not in Ronan. Ronan remained exactly the same. Calm, controlled, patient. The change happened inside Jake. For months he had been afraid. Now he was becoming desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. Lots of them. The drinking became a nightly routine, then an afternoon routine, then an all-day routine. Sarah stopped arguing about it, not because she accepted it, because she was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of excuses, tired of promises that lasted 3 days before being broken. Tired of carrying a marriage by herself. One evening she found Jake sitting alone on the porch, bottle in hand, eyes fixed on the road. The same road Ronan often drove. The same road Jake spent hours watching, waiting, obsessing. Fear had become a habit, and habits are difficult to break. "You need help." Jake laughed. Not because it was funny, because it wasn't. Everyone keeps saying that. Sarah sat beside him. For a moment neither spoke. Then Jake finally asked the question that had been poisoning him for months. "Do you like him?" Sarah froze. Jake immediately noticed. That hesitation hurt more than any answer could. "I didn't ask if you loved him." His voice was quiet now. "I asked if you like him." Sarah looked away. And that was answer enough. Because she did. Not because of his looks, not because of his mystery, not because of his past. She liked how he listened, how he remembered details, how he never raised his voice, how he never complained, how he seemed completely comfortable with who he was. Everything Jake used to be. Everything Jake wasn't anymore. Jake stood abruptly. The bottle slipped from his hand and shattered. Glass scattered across the porch. Neither of them looked down, because the real damage wasn't on the floor. It was standing between them. Across town, Ronan sat alone on the back porch of his house, watching the sunset. The same calm expression, the same unreadable eyes, the same silence. And for the first time, Olivia Hart showed up. The black SUV rolled slowly into the driveway. Ronan wasn't surprised, almost as if he had expected it. Olivia stepped out, older now, a little sadder, a little less certain. Life hadn't been kind to her either. For several seconds she simply stood there, looking at him, trying to find the man she once knew, trying to find the man she betrayed, trying to find something familiar. But she couldn't. "Can we talk?" Ronan looked at her, then nodded once. Nothing more. The conversation lasted almost an hour. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but Olivia left in tears, and Ronan never followed, never comforted her, never stopped her from leaving, just watched her drive away, the way someone watches a chapter finally close. That night Olivia sat alone in her apartment, crying. Not because Ronan had been cruel. He hadn't. Not because he yelled. He didn't. Not because he insulted her. He never would. The truth was far worse. For the first time, Olivia realized she wasn't important anymore. The woman who once occupied every corner of his heart now occupied none of it. There was no hatred, no anger, no longing, nothing. And somehow, that hurt more than rejection ever could. Across town, Jake was having the same realization. Because while Olivia was discovering she no longer mattered to Ronan, Jake was discovering something much worse. He still did. Not because Ronan loved him. Not because Ronan hated him. Because Jake represented something unfinished. A debt. A wound. A memory. And Ronan Drake had come back to settle accounts. The next few weeks were brutal. Sarah became more distant. Jake became more paranoid. Olivia became obsessed with understanding why Ronan had returned. And through it all, Ronan remained calm, watching, waiting, patient, like a man who already knew exactly how the story would end. Then one winter evening, Jake came home early. A decision that would change everything. Because that night, for the first time, he would discover just how much control he had already lost. And when that door opened, his world would never be the same again. Part 5. The night everything changed. There are moments in life when a person realizes they have already lost. Not when the final blow lands, not when the ending arrives, but when something inside them finally accepts reality. For Jake Morrison, that moment arrived on a cold winter evening. The snow had started falling shortly after sunset. Work ended early. The roads were becoming dangerous. For once, Jake decided not to stop at Murphy's bar. For once, he decided to go home. Maybe he wanted to talk to Sarah. Maybe he wanted to fix things. Maybe he was simply tired. Even now, nobody knows. What is known is that he pulled into his driveway around 7:30 and immediately felt something was wrong. The house lights were on. Nothing unusual about that. But there was a feeling, a weight in his stomach, a quiet voice telling him something had changed. He stepped inside. The house was silent. No television, no music, no voices, just silence. Then he saw it. A black leather jacket hanging over the back of a chair. Jake stopped moving. His entire body went still. Because he knew that jacket. The entire town knew that jacket. Ronan Drake. For several seconds, Jake simply stared, hoping he was wrong, praying he was wrong. But deep down, he already knew. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow, unhurried, coming from upstairs. Jake looked toward the staircase, and his world shifted. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, tall, broad-shouldered, calm. Ronan Drake. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't rushing. He simply walked down the stairs as if he belonged there. One step, then another, until he reached the bottom. The two men stared at each other. 5 years of history standing in one room. 25 years of friendship reduced to silence. Jake expected anger, mockery, a challenge, something, anything. Instead, Ronan simply looked at him. The same calm expression, the same unreadable eyes, the same terrifying confidence. And for the first time, Jake understood something. Ronan wasn't trying to win a fight. He wasn't trying to prove he was stronger. He wasn't trying to humiliate him in front of the town. This wasn't about the town. This wasn't about Sarah. This wasn't even about Olivia anymore. This was about Jake. Only Jake. Because years ago, Jake had taken away the one place Ronan felt safe. His future. His home. His trust. And now, Jake was standing inside his own house feeling exactly the same way. Like an outsider. Like a stranger. Like someone who no longer belonged. Ronan walked toward the front door, close enough for Jake to smell the cold air on his jacket. Close enough to remind him how much larger the man seemed now. Not physically. Something else. Something harder to explain. Presence. Authority. Power. Jake wanted to speak. Wanted to yell. Wanted to demand answers. Wanted to stop him. But nothing came out. Not a single word. Because for the first time in his life, Jake Morrison was afraid of Ronan Drake. Not afraid of being hit. Not afraid of being threatened. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of standing in front of a man who knew exactly who he was and exactly what he had become. Ronan stopped at the door. For several seconds he looked outside at the falling snow, then finally spoke. The first words he had addressed directly to Jake in years. "You should have been a better friend." That was it. No speech, no threats, no accusations. Just one sentence. Simple. Brutal. Final. Then he opened the door and stepped into the snow. The darkness swallowed him almost immediately, leaving Jake alone. For several minutes he didn't move. Then he slowly looked upstairs, toward the bedroom, toward the life he thought he still controlled, toward the marriage he thought he still understood, toward the future he thought was still his. And in that moment, Jake Morrison finally realized something. Ronan Drake had already won. The terrifying part? The final move hadn't even happened yet, because after that night, Jake stopped sleeping, stopped trusting, stopped believing. And once a man loses those things, the collapse is only a matter of time. Part 6. The Collapse. After that night, Jake Morrison stopped pretending. Stopped pretending everything was fine. Stopped pretending he wasn't scared. Stopped pretending he still had control. Because once you've seen a man and every morning afterward, Jake woke up with the same feeling. The feeling that something had been taken from him. Something important. Something he could never get back. The worst part? Ronan wasn't doing anything. At least not openly. He wasn't calling. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't even talking about Jake. Yet somehow, Jake felt him everywhere. In every room. In every conversation. In every silence. Sarah finally moved into the guest room. Not after a big fight. Not after a dramatic argument. Just quietly. One evening Jake came home, and her clothes were gone. The bedroom felt colder, emptier, like a place people used to live. He stood there staring at the empty closet, and for the first time, He understood what Ronan must have felt 5 years ago. The realization made him sick. Meanwhile, Olivia Hart was unraveling too, because the more she thought about her conversation with Ronan, the more it haunted her. She had expected anger. She had expected blame, maybe even hatred. Instead, she received something much worse. Indifference. Complete indifference. The woman who once imagined spending her life with him had become a stranger, a footnote, a memory, nothing more. And every day that realization hurt a little more. Then came the diner incident, the moment Jake truly broke. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. The diner was crowded. Locals filled every booth, the usual small-town crowd. Jake entered alone and immediately saw Ronan, seated near the window, drinking coffee, reading something on his phone, completely relaxed. The owner spotted Ronan, smiled, walked over, shook his hand. A few minutes later, another man approached, then another, then another. People wanted to talk to him. People wanted his advice. People respected him. And Jake watched all of it. Every second. 5 years ago, those same people respected Jake. Now they barely noticed him. He wasn't the story anymore. Ronan was. The man who returned. The mystery. The legend. The survivor. Jake left without ordering anything. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even noticed. That night he drove to Olivia's apartment. She opened the door, took one look at him, and knew exactly why he was there. Because she was falling apart too, just differently. He won. Jake said it before even entering. The words surprised both of them, because saying them aloud made them real. Olivia looked away. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she quietly answered, "No." Jake frowned. "What?" Olivia laughed softly, a sad laugh, the laugh of someone finally understanding something painful. "He didn't win." Jake stared at her. Then why did everything feel so hopeless? Why did everything feel over? Olivia finally looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, because she had figured it out before he had. And the truth was brutal. He stopped playing years ago. Silence. Complete silence. Because suddenly Jake understood. This wasn't a competition. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't revenge in the way he imagined. Ronan wasn't trying to beat them. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't trying to take trophies. The destruction was happening because Jake and Olivia were still trapped in the past. And Ronan wasn't. He had become something else, something beyond them. The realization should have brought peace. Instead, it destroyed Jake completely. Because if Ronan wasn't fighting, then there was nothing left to fight back against. No enemy. No target. No war. Only consequences. Weeks passed. Jake drank more, worked less, talked less, laughed never. His world was shrinking, one bottle at a time. Then, one evening, Sarah finally said the words Jake knew were coming, the words he had feared for months. "I want a divorce." Everything stopped. The room, the air, his heartbeat, everything. Because in that moment, Jake finally understood. The revenge was complete. Not because Ronan had taken anything, but because Jake had lost everything. Exactly the way Ronan once had. And standing in the ruins of his life, Jake Morrison made a decision. A terrible decision. A final decision. one that would end the story forever. And when the storm arrived 3 nights later, he would get into his truck and drive. Part 7. The Last Drive. 3 days after Sarah asked for a divorce, a storm rolled into town. The kind of storm people remembered. Cold rain, heavy winds, dark clouds swallowing the sky before sunset. The entire town seemed quieter, as if it somehow knew something was coming. Jake Morrison spent most of that day alone. The divorce papers sat untouched on the kitchen table. Half-empty bottles surrounded him. The television played quietly in the background. He wasn't watching it. His mind was somewhere else, years away, back when he and Ronan were boys, back before Olivia, back before betrayal, back before guilt, back before everything became complicated. He remembered fishing trips, summer baseball games, old promises, old dreams, 25 years of memories, all ending the same way, with one terrible decision. As evening approached, Jake left the house. Sarah heard the truck start. She watched from the window. For a brief moment she considered stopping him, saying something, anything. But she didn't, because by then she knew she couldn't save him. Nobody could. The truck disappeared into the storm, and Sarah never saw him again. Across town, Ronan Drake sat alone on the porch of his house. Rain tapped softly against the roof. A cup of coffee rested beside him. The same calm expression, the same unreadable eyes, the same silence. The silence he carried everywhere. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Olivia. For several seconds he considered ignoring it, then answered. Neither spoke immediately, only the sound of rain. Then Olivia finally whispered, "Do you ever think about who you used to be?" Ronan stared into the darkness. For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. Because the truth was complicated. The young man who once planned a wedding. The young man who trusted people completely. The young man who believed loyalty lasted forever. That man felt like someone else's memory, someone else's life. I don't know. It was the most honest thing he had said in years. The call ended. The rain continued. And somewhere beyond town, Jake Morrison kept driving. The road climbed into the hills, curving through darkness, past forests, past cliffs, past places where nobody would see him or stop him. For the first time in months, Jake felt strangely calm. Not happy, not relieved, just calm. The fight was finally over. There was nothing left to lose. The storm grew worse. Visibility vanished. Rain hammered against the windshield. The truck's headlights struggled against the darkness. And somewhere along that lonely mountain road, Jake Morrison made peace with something. Not with Ronan, not with Sarah, not even with himself. With the truth. The truth that some choices never stop costing you, no matter how much time passes, no matter how badly you wish they would. Crushed far below the cliff road, twisted metal, broken glass, silence. No witnesses, no note, no answers, just an ending. The funeral took place 4 days later. The entire town attended. Some came out of respect, some came out of guilt. Some came because they wanted to see who else would show up. Small towns are like that. Olivia sat near the back. Sarah sat in the front. And standing beneath a large oak tree at the edge of the cemetery was Ronan Drake. Alone. Watching. Silent. Nobody approached him. Nobody knew what to say. What do you say to a man who spent 5 years becoming a ghost? What do you say to a man who returned and changed everything? The funeral ended. People slowly left. Conversations faded. Cars disappeared down the road. Eventually, only 3 people remained. Sarah, Olivia, and Ronan. Sarah looked toward him. For a moment it seemed she might speak. Instead, she simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement, nothing more. Then she walked away. Olivia remained, the woman who had once imagined spending her entire life with him, the woman who had spent years regretting one decision, the woman who finally understood there would be no second chance, no reunion, no redemption, no happy ending. Was it worth it? The question escaped before she could stop it. Ronan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Then his eyes moved toward Jake's grave. Rainwater still covered the fresh soil. The storm hadn't completely passed. Finally, he answered, "I don't know." And that was the truth. The revenge had worked. The pain had been returned. The debt had been paid. Yet somehow, nothing felt finished. Nothing felt healed. Nothing felt better. That evening Ronan returned home. The next morning, he was gone. Just gone. The house was sold. The truck disappeared. No forwarding address. No goodbye. No explanation. Exactly the way he had left 5 years earlier. A mystery. A rumor. A ghost. Years later, people still told stories about him. About the man who vanished, the man who returned, and the man who vanished again. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody knew what became of him. And perhaps that was fitting, because some people aren't meant to stay. They arrive, they change everything, and then they disappear into the mist, leaving everyone else behind to live with what remains. The end. If this story reminded you that betrayal doesn't disappear simply because time passes, and that some choices echo for a lifetime, please like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable Reddit stories.